What about assessment? What kinds of changes are affected in assessment when this change is itself affected? There are basically three different areas that I think are interesting to talk about. The first one is, what kinds of things are assessed? Do we assess the group work? Do we look at the quality of the videos and assign a grade on them on the basis of a rubric or not? My answer to that is no. The purpose of doing the group work is to foster creative and critical thought. I'm not trying to push people towards a convergent sort of thinking about anything. I'm usually doing divergent thinking, but you can use your own judgment when it comes to that. It's also not particularly viable to evaluate the grades of individuals on the basis of group work. It's something I'm just generally not fond of in a justice sort of framework. But also, spending all the time that it would take for me to evaluate the particular contributions of people within the group, I spend much more happily going around and ensuring that people are participating well instead of assessing that they are. Again, the choice is yours to make, but it works most effectively for me, both in a small and a large classroom environment, to go around and facilitate this. We're in a learning environment, and thus far for me it has been successful just to say, I expect high quality work of you. I don't need to grade that because I demand it from you. That's one issue that's interesting. Another issue is, what kinds of things do we grade, and what sorts of levels of depth do we assess on? So do we have the clicker questions at the beginning? I call them clicker questions, but if we ask a quiz at the beginning of a class, do we grade that, or do we just use that as a formative feedback device? It's up to you. I happen to grade mine if I can, but if you don't prefer to, or you don't want it to be a high-pressure environment for them, or you don't want to spend as much time as people would demand to go through their notes so closely so that they could answer the questions, your prerogative. When I write assessments, so I still give exams in my class. They're associated with the learning from the unit that preceded them, typically 4 exams and a final exam, comprehensive. When I do that, do I ask the same questions and do I ask them in the same way? Oh wow, it depends. If I have a 20-person class, I was writing essay exams for that class anyway. But what kinds of essays I ask now depend on the sort of content that we covered not only in the lectures, but also in discussion. Now, if I've written all of my discussion questions in advance, that's not a concern. I can still write the exam in advance and have it ready in whatever format I need it. But the questions that I ask are not only declarative knowledge, not only those like one level up sort of collaborative idea formation between ideas, it is the creative and critical aspects. I'll ask somebody to write up a creative thought on something and defend their perspective. I didn't do that before as much. I certainly can now because they've had experience in the classroom with engaging with content at that level. Now, if I'm in a 200-person classroom, it's less easy for me to give an essay exam for obvious reasons. But the kinds of multiple choice or few short answer questions that I write can again be predicated upon the content that we covered in class and the processes that we used, critical and creative thought, addressing topics, instead of just thinking about the declarative knowledge that was communicated to people. So be deliberate about that. It may be another change that you need to effect, but maybe you can do it gradually. You can start instituting more critical and creative thought questions into your assessments over time, and then eventually you'll have some that are much more geared towards that. Yes, they assume the presence of declarative knowledge, but they also demand critical and creative facility in students.